we're really excited to start our third session of our Performing Water Zoom seminar series. And we are immensely glad that you can all join us again and are looking forward to our session on waves. So maybe just a couple of points in general about our seminar series in case you're joining us for the first time. We've come up with this series and the associated research platform as a sort of way of exploring water as a core material, a malleable medium, and also as a site of interdisciplinarity and encounter. And we also wanted to just create a space to meet other researchers and artists and performance makers that are working in this very rich field of water. And we've actually had a lot of really exciting feedback already. And if anybody else is sort of interested further in collaborating with us, then please shoot us an email. So that would be very exciting. Just to kind of just give you a sense again of who we are. So we are 4 of us in total that are organizing this, and maybe Camilla and Anna, if you can pin us all.
I think we're good.
Okay, so this is us. Maybe we just gonna, so basically that's Anna and Anne-Laure, who are both faculty in the English department at Le Mans University. Anna has an interest in the role of water in immigrant theatre, specifically in contemporary migrant theatre. And Anne-Laure is working on the intersection between visual arts and water. And then there's also Camilla, who is currently a PhD student at the Sorbonne and works on landscape theatre and contemporary British drama. And me, I'm Ramona, and I'm a researcher at the Free University in Berlin, so not in France, and I work on the interaction between digital and environmental theatre and performance. All right, so that's us. And I don't know, since we've kind of had a really big gap now between our last session, which was at some point in October, at the beginning of the fall in a way, and the last 2 sessions kind of actually quite close to each other, and now this one. And so we just thought we'd give you a super brief summary of what has already happened, and before we continue into what we will be up to today. So currents and underwater were our first 2 sessions, and in currents we began thinking about both the politics and colonial histories of water, and focused on how visual art and video work has traced the sort of migration of people across waters, and how the cultural shifts and power dynamics partake in this form of exchange. And we had Valérie Morrison from the Université de Bourgogne, and the Irish artist and researcher Marion Keating that joined us for a talk and discussion about Keating's work, and there were also other visual arts work involved. And then in underwater, we moved literally underwater and looked at underwater sculpture by Jason DeCaris Taylor, and his collaboration with the marine biologist Helen Scales, and also Al Grimet, who is running an organization called Art Change, Art for Change, and they discussed the interconnections between environmental visual art and climate change activism as well, and the questions of land art and water. And with that, we finally come to today, and we are sort of making a shift here, because we are moving from the realm of the visual very much that was sort of dominant in the first 2 sessions to that of the sonic. And to restate or state the somewhat obvious, I guess, is waves are obviously both the waves of water breaking on the shore, as well as the sound waves that enter our ear canal and that literally kind of touch us in the act of hearing. So hearing, listening, and the entire sphere of the sonic become graspable to us in metaphors provided by water or through water. And our most immediate and fundamental experience, as we already kind of experienced in our trailer as well, of water, is very much one that exists through sounds: the raindrops falling, the waves crashing, the streams gurgling, and so on and so forth. So water thus has become all 3: a metaphor to describe sound experiences, but is also a material within sound art, and a site and ecology that can display the politics of the Anthropocene. So to listen to the resonances between these different aspects of the relationship between water and sound is crucial, and finding ways of performing water and investigating the politics of listening within that sphere of kind of water and sound art performance is what we are going to try and do now. And we want to really emphasize this question of transdisciplinarity and that interconnectivity and the continuity between the human and the non-human. And so to do that, we've invited 4 fabulous guests, and I'm really excited that they all had the time to come here today, and maybe we can pin them all now so that I can introduce them all. And that is, on the one hand, Tomoko Sauvage, who's a Japanese sound artist and musician that has creates very unique wonderful sound art performances with hybrid instruments that combine water, ceramic bowls, and hydrophones to amplify the sort of sound collages she's creating. And her musical experimentation is grounded in a sort of live performance practice that also improvises and interacts with spatial environments. And she's an internationally acclaimed performer who has traveled very widely and presented her work, for example, at the V&A in London, recently at the Humboldt Forum in Berlin as well, or at the Roskilde Festival, to name only a few. And then there is Salome Voegelin. She is a sound philosopher and artist who is currently a visiting professor at the University of Braunschweig, and has published very extensively on sound studies and on listening as a political practice. And her books include, for example, Sonic Possible Worlds, The Political Possibility of Sound and Listening to Noise and Silence. And Salome also uses collaborative and communal approaches in her work and performative interventions. And so her work really crosses back and forth in very unique and stimulating ways between theory and practice. And finally, we have Robert Stock and Sebastian Schwesinger, and they're working together at the Cultural History Department of the Humboldt University in Berlin. And Robert is a junior professor there and also a member of the Excellence Cluster Matters of Activity, Image Space Material. And he has just concluded a bigger research project on media and participation, and called On Demand and Entitlement. And his research is focused on cultures of knowledge and the materiality of epistemic practices. And he works together with Sebastian, as I said, who's a doctoral researcher also in media and cultural history, and who studied cultural history and theory, musicology, philosophy, and microeconomics as well. You'll have to explain us all about that at the Humboldt University and also at the Fohm University of Applied Science in Essen. And he's a co-founder of the Berlin Research Network on Sonic Thinking. So, and together they will be presenting work on the Anthropocene, ocean, and bioacoustics. And the way this is going to work now is that Sebastian and Robert are going to start, and then we're going to move through and have each of our guests present for about 15 minutes. And it's going to be partially a mix of presentation and performance plus presentation. And if anybody has like a really immediate question after any presentation, we're very happy to take that, but maybe just 1 or 2. And then we move on to the other ones, and then we'll kind of open it up to a sort of roundtable discussion between us, and then very soon also like a bigger discussion with all of you, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. And please feel free to use the chat throughout as much as you want. And Camila will check on will keep track of all the questions and comments that come in there, and that we can get back to when we are in the discussion section. And I hope that all makes sense. And I'm really looking forward to all the presentations and to our exchanges now. So I'll hand it over to Sebastian and Robert.
Thank you very much to the 4 of you, Ramona, Camila, Anna, and Laura, for this nice introduction and invitation. I'm trying to show you the screen that I've prepared, and I hope we are there already and you can see it, so we can move on with the content-wise. And it's very interesting that you said that you ended the last session on the water, and perhaps we can start with continuing underwater as well, but opening up not the visual, but a very, very interesting and rich sonic realm for that. It's Robert's and my turn to start this round today with a more historical perspective on the mediation and communication of underwater worlds. Although there has been a long literary history of imaginations of aquatic life, more direct access to the underwater realm has been gained by the advent of sonic technological investigations. The interest in underwater acoustics rose at the beginning of the 20th century and was boosted by military demands. The key component for this research was the development of hydrophones. Underwater microphones that could be used to detect sound signals and process them for human perception, although acoustic waves behave differently in seawater as their propagating medium. It is revealing what happened when people started to listen underwater, and there are lots and lots of records, to this day even, that document what struck them most, that the oceans are not quiet. Here's a contemporary example of Robert Siak, oceanographer and scientist at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, shortly NOAA. You would think that the deepest part of the ocean would be one of the quietest places on Earth, yet there is almost constant noise. The ambient sound field is dominated by the sounds of earthquakes, both near and far, as well as by the distinct moans of baleen whales and perhaps the clamor of a Category 4 typhoon that just happened to pass overhead. It is a rich sounding world that hydrophones have opened up, with geophonic, biophonic and anthropophonic noises, to borrow the terms from acoustic ecology. They are all mixed and interacting, traveling long distances due to the increased transmission capacity of water. Immediately in history, military interests struggled with these circumstances. They needed to clean up this cacophony and transform it into a communication space. I brought you one example which overtly documents these early difficulties of military underwater surveillance. I hope so. Yep, there we go. Hydrophones have been mainly used in World War I and II to listen for enemy vessels and submarines. These two images give you an impression of how such a working environment of a sonar operator on board looked like. The most important aspect of their training was to become able to distinguish the sounds of enemy objects from the rest of underwater sound, which required a lot of oral training comparable to musicians. I will give you an example of such an oral training from a Second World War training record that I'm thankful the history of science researcher Lino Comprubi once showed me and tested me with.
One of Series D16. The most important part of your job as operators of the expendable radiosonic buoy equipment is that you be able to recognize and interpret the sounds made by submarines maneuvering underwater. There is only one way for you to develop this ability, that is, to listen to such sounds and study them many, many times. This series of phonograph records has been prepared for just that purpose. Play them over and over until you become completely familiar with those particular sounds which mean a submarine. Water, you will recall, is a very good conductor of sound. As a result, it is never completely quiet underwater.
So if you would like to test it for yourself, I provide you with 3 examples, and you would have to guess which one is the submarine. First, Here's the second one. And here's the third one. Just imagine there are a lot more than these three. But to make it a bit more easy, and of course due to time constraints, I only brought you three today. And I would not like the chat to explode, but if you can put your right answer in it, I would like to see how your guesses are. But be quick, because I just lift the curtain in 3, 2, and
people are mostly hesitating between 2 and 3. So there is a number of guesses, and it's either 2 or 3.
Thank you. You're quite good. The first one was ice flow underwater that has been recorded. And the second one was snapping shrimp. And the third one was the submarine. And it's exactly the three of them that I brought exactly as ice flow is a geophonic sound, the sound made by the non-living surrounding snapping shrimp, a typically biophonic sound, which sounds very much mechanic, you have to say, and it's coined the loudest animal below the water surface. And the third one was the submarine. With this example, we have stayed within the military realm. But what I wanted to show you is that in the early days of hydroacoustics, the underwater sonic world was surprising and challenging even for military scientists and operators. Robert, you can take over.
So hello there, nice to be here. So I will continue this kind of historic journey into the world of underwater sounds and sounding waves. And I will be continuing this after World War II, where the underwater acoustic and microphone arrays were somehow transformed in their function and dimension. So you can click on the next slide if you would be so kind. Genau. So Frank Watlington, a US Navy engineer in the Bermudas during the Cold War, was one of the sonar technicians, and he was listening for in order to detect and identify Russian submarines or dynamite explosions through a set of hydrophones. At some point in the 50s, he picked up unfamiliar sounds, and it was in 55 that he identified those sounds because he spotted some local humpback birds around the spot where he stayed. About 10 years later, in 67, when the material was declassified, he handed it over to a researcher named Roger Payne. And Roger Payne, together with his partner, Katie Wayne, and also a whale specialist, Scott McVeigh, they analyzed the data and used it as a musical record even. So they came to the conclusion that these whale vocalizations consist of unique patterns, and they termed them like songs. So and what we here see is Frank Watlington, already a bit later in the mid-70s. And I also brought you a photo of these magnetic tapes that Watlington made, and that are now part of a collection at Ocean Alliance whale song library that is being in restoration processes. So I found this quite interesting, how they tried to conserve these early records from the 50s and 70s. And I also brought you a quote from the later paper from Payne and McVeigh, where they described how Watlington made these recordings. So he said in his office, and was connected via a cable with the hydrophone array of coast, and then he could at least he said so that he could record the whale sounds without disturbing them. So we can now move to the next slide, please. So what Roger Payne and Katie Payne did in 1970, they published a record called Songs of the Humpback Whale, where they put audio recordings that Watlington had made. Yeah, and this became a quite well-known and popular record during the next decade. So it was first issued as a rather independent publisher, and where they put you see also a photograph of the booklet, which came in Japanese and American, in Japanese and English, also to engage buyers and listeners. And there was a huge critique on the whaling industries in the US and Japan. So they urged the readers to help stop commercial whaling. And so it had also a big impact on the Save the Whales campaign that started in 1975. And it was issued by National Geographic in 1979 as a flexi disc that came with the journal. And it was also part of the, so some excerpts of this record were also included in the 1977 Golden Record that went aboard the Voyager spacecraft. So it became really popular, and also had an impact on the official banning of industrial whaling in 1982 in the US. So that was kind of the popular impact that this record had on the anti-whaling movement and the environmentalist agenda that came up. So that was really a change maker, a game changer in this. Sorry for the wording. In this context in the 1970s for the environmental activism and so on. So please, next slide. On the scientific agenda, we have this quite well-known piece by Roger Payne and Scott McVeigh that came out in 1971 in Science, where they lay out their findings and methods. And so they write, we have become aware of what we believe to be the humpback's most extraordinary feature. They emit a series of surprisingly beautiful sounds, and through the analysis of audio, of acoustic data, they managed to show that these sound utterings by the whale had really a structure. You can go to the next slide, please. So there we can see and have a look at the transduction and transformation of the data. So in the middle, you see the acoustic spectrography that was made by the researchers, and then on the left there is these the phrases that then form themes and songs. So the visualization of these data was helpful to see the structure of these. So the systematic structure of this utterings by the whale. Yeah. So to quote Spectrographic analysis shows, however, that all prolonged vocalization occur in long fixed sequences and are repeated with considerable accuracy every few minutes. I'm not sure if, yeah, could you just put on the recording? Is there? Can you turn it on? Yeah, these technicalities. So what I wanted to show you is was an extract of the first part of this record, and from this quote from the album cover is quite yeah, illuminating. So the sea in most places is alive with sound. The noises that most interfere with the humpback whale songs are the low-pitched ones. And in recent years, ship traffic noise has become a constant draw of low-pitched noise in the ocean, even far from shipping lanes. And there is an interesting part at this very first song where you can hear also some detonations in the recording, and then they decided on purpose to leave these parts also in this recording to show the noise in the underwater soundscapes, not only the songs of the singing whales. So we will move now to the more present, although yeah, I can mention that already in the 1970s there were also some experiments to make not only these documentary approaches to see that whales utter these systematic sounds and songs, but there were also artistic experiments. There was another a French record that came out from Roger and Katie Payne that experimented somehow. So there was already an aesthetic shift, and there was a guy from Greenpeace. Let me look up his name, Will E. Jackson, and he had this experiments of kind of the interspecies music. So he had an modular synthesizer on board of this little ship and tried to communicate and make music together with the whales. So that's kind of an interesting anecdote that I can wanted to let you know. So in recent years, there's a lot of discussion, as we already saw in the quote, about the anthropogenic noise pollution of the so-called Anthropocene ocean, and also in this respect, we have these encounters that I already outlined between between science and bioacoustics and kind of an aesthetic approach on the other side. And in this paper here from last year by Carlos Duarte and others, there was also a sound artist taking part. So yeah, just that was Jana Winderen. So she is a sound artist that is interested in the Anthropocene ocean and contributed to this piece of that appeared in Science. So, and we have these headlines: "A human noise is taking over the ocean soundscapes," and so on. So there's really a problematization of the underwater soundscape, how to say. So, and you can go to the next slide to see a bit more of Jana Winderen. So in the noisiest guy on the planet, for instance, which you can find on YouTube or on Bandcamp, I think. She uses snapping shrimp to shift to a multi-species soundscape. And so Winderen calls listeners back to these creatures, centuries now of climate change and the field. And the oceans are becoming not only a lab for artists like herself, but also for humanity, which is experimenting on its ecosystem, like Stefan Helmreich an anthropologist comments on her work. So through and with such sound works, the artists collaborate with marine biologists and other scientists. And Jana Winderen, for instance, I already mentioned it, collaborated with these on this science paper. And yeah, by reviewing published research from the last decade, Duarte and co-authors outline how biophony is overlaid by anthropophony, and how anthropogenic noise impacts marine animals, and yeah, which measures or policy frameworks might contribute to, I quote, mitigate impacts on marine animals that arise from anthropogenic noise and perturbations of soundscapes. So, and my last slide. So accordingly, in Winderen's composition, she blends various recordings made in Greenland, Norway, Panama, USA, Brazil, that include the sounds of seals, melting ice, pilot whale echolocation, and various species crustacean, bottlenose delphins, and humpback whales. So yeah, she draws attention to, on how these animals sounds are superimposed by motorboats, pile driving, and other human-made underwater noise. So, and yeah, I think you can have a look at, or you can, yeah, listen to it on YouTube. Perhaps it's not working here. Sorry for that.
I guess we're already a bit running late. So if you allow us 2 more minutes, Camila, Ramona, then I would just like to yeah, try to close it, going full circle with just introducing another, by another example. And yes, of course, we will give you all the YouTube links so that you can listen to it afterwards in a more, because you know you have to listen to things in a more decent way and not only in these tiny little bits, I guess. The last example of an artistic accompaniment or intervention with oceanic sciences comes from Sonja Levy. In her film For the Love of Corals, an ecology of perhaps, she followed a team of scientists in London who pioneered in the restoration of corals, indeed the first team that succeeded to induce corals to spawn under laboratory conditions. Especially in her sonic composition, she tries to bridge the laboratory and the oceanic world. Some of the features of the sonic artwork correspond to live data from the Great Barrier Reef, which of course is to productively parasitize scientific monitoring. This seems to become a more common approach in artistic, scientific, or public academic partnerships, which was more or less the narration of our small talk, beginning within the realm of a more military research nexus and bringing it back to a more research and popular culture, and now we're researched to arts bridge. So you can listen into the Arctic sound world online through microphones and hydrophones installed at polar science stations, for example, a project on penguin vocalization that we've come across at the Berlin Museum of Natural History provides their recordings for public music hackathons and so forth. There are more examples of such an artistic or public, let's call it productive misuse of research data. It seems that the political relevance of scientific research should be fostered by artistic or public relations. So perhaps it is politics where science and the arts meet when it comes to sound and water. Another aspect regarding the work of Tomoko, who comes next, I found interesting, is that the aquarium was on stage in Levy's work. Could it be that another way in which underwater science and the arts meet is on a more methodological level? In order to work with an object or environment, scientific research has developed mechanisms to establish laboratory surroundings that mimic their natural counterparts, but which are completely and meticulously controllable. This has been the key component, for example, for the Coral project to be successful. For an artistic work with sound and water, I would guess at least some kind of operational environment needs to be created, which is not necessarily mimicking natural surroundings, but in which also input and output relations, as well as exogenic factors, can be established and well managed for an artistic result. And with this, I would like to hand over to Tomoko and thank you all for your kind attention for our more than long introductory remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert and Sebastian. That was really, truly fascinating, and we will get back to it. And I almost, I don't really have to do another handover because Sebastian already did it. So Tomoko, it's over to you and another use of hydrophones.
Hello, my name is Tomoko Sauvage. Thank you for the introduction, very nice introduction. So I'm a musician, sound artist working on an instrument that I've been developing with using hydrophones, combined with bowls, some porcelain bowls, but also glass bowls, water inside, and I resonate these bowls using different techniques, including feedback that I will be talking about, and also sometimes water dripping system that is heating bowls and the water itself, and also I'm playing a lot with bubbles, which I will show you right now to start with. Hi. Okay. Did you hear the sound as well? Yeah. Okay. Good. So that was bubbles emitted from porous terracotta. So that's a ceramic fired but anglazed. So it's porous and it absorbs water by emitting bubbles, small micro bubbles that makes quite surprising sound each time. It's quite unpredictable. So that's why I'm calling it fortune biscuit, like fortune cookies. It's like a each time I put these ceramic pieces, it's like they are showing, the bubbles are showing a new landscape that I was not expecting, and it changes totally the soundscape during my performance. And yes, so that's one of the elements which are unpredictable. And I also want to talk about feedback, my feedback techniques that is particular because I modulate feedback tones with water waves. So it's like water becomes a modulator, and well, you will see a bit of the video later, but I explain a little bit about the principle of this hydrophonic feedback technique, which is so I use an acoustic phenomenon called feedback that is kind of a loop between the microphone and a speaker in the room. So the microphones pick up the sound coming from the speakers, and of course it's sent to the speakers again, and the microphones taking the sound again, and it makes this kind of loop that is infinite. But I have to control. You have to control the level of the sound, because it can go very violent when it's very loud, but if the level is too low, it stops the loop. You have to send the right amount of gain to sustain this loop. And at the same time, there's certain frequencies that resonate more than others. It's also according to the room acoustics. It's quite complex because it also depends on the architecture of the room, but also the human beings or objects in the room that can interrupt this loop. If, for example, if someone is standing before the speaker, one of the speakers, then it changes the mechanism, and doesn't sound the same. So the particularity of my technique is that I kind of sculpt a mass of water by hand, making waves to modulate the sound, the frequency, because the principle of this instrument is very simple, but I can tune the balls by the quantity of water. When there's more water, the sound is more lower, and there's less water, the sound is higher. So by making waves, the sound, the frequency also waves, and so that it gives it gives so I can also attenuate this feedback frequency by changing the frequency, by putting my hand to have more water I mean to have to have a lower sound, the lower notes. So it's like kind of a pitch bending sound synthesis. Um, and also talking about tuning, the water evaporates all the time, of course. So the tune notes change depending on the temperature and humidity of the space. So now I will show you a video. I hope it works. Okay. So that was a concert in Amsterdam, the Sonic Acts festival. So yes, I think my presentation is that's it. If you have any question.
Thank you, Tomoko. That was beautiful. Are there any immediate questions for Tomoko about her process, maybe, or about any of the clips that you heard that you'd like to ask now? Then
I would have a question. Can you hear me?
yes.
So my question to Tomoko would be, why did she get interested in this type of music instead of more traditional music, for example? if there's anything that specific that triggered her passion for this type of music, because for me as a non-musician, for me it looks more like a research type of music than just doing music. So is it for a research project that she got interested in this, or is it more like she wants to bring something new to innovate the music, or what is it?
Thank you for the question. I come from a music field. I studied jazz. Then I got interested in Indian music via American music that was influenced by Indian music and all the Eastern culture. And when I was studying Indian music, Hindustani music, but also Carnatic music of the South India, I encountered a very special instrument called Jaratarangam. It's balls of water like mine, but without hydrophones. You hit the balls with sticks, but it's the same principle. So the bigger balls and more water for the lower notes, and the smaller, less water, higher notes. And I was totally mesmerized by this instrument, the simplicity of the sound, but also of the device. I was totally fascinated, and I started to imitate it completely. And I also went to visit the master in South India, in Chennai, and he showed me and we talked about it. And at one day I heard about hydrophone. I was not coming from any background of electronic music or experimental music, and I bought a hydrophone, and it totally changed the nature of the instrument, and I was really excited about it. So that's how I started this instrument. So it's really not like scientific interest, but I was really drawn to the sound itself, the sound quality, which I've never heard before, and that was really just so inspiring, and it's been still inspiring me.
Thank you. Is there another question for Tomoko?
Yes, I have a question, Ramona.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Tomoko. I was it was wonderful. I had listened to your music before on the net because I was so curious about this type of experimental music sound apparatus, because it's really it includes many dimensions. And I find it really striking the way you highlight the materiality of sounds, how your music exhibits or unveils the physicality of sounds. And I was wondering about the importance of physicality for you. Obviously, your hands are very important in creating the music. Beyond the hands, I was wondering about the role of your entire body. Do you conceive of your own posture as a kind of, as being central, and do you see yourself as developing a choreography? So I'd like to hear a bit more about that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Very interesting. And yes, totally, the physicality and maybe corporeality is totally my interest. Even though I'm not it's rare that I talk about it or even think about it really, because I'm just searching for the sound and but I think it's very natural to, I have to think about the choreography, as you say, um, um, because of the performativity of this practice, and with the object that I manipulate on stage in real time. Nothing is pre-recorded before. So yes, I cannot really analyze to present it well to you by words, because I think I do it, I just do it, and I haven't thought about it very well, but it's the performance is you have an audience, and that makes a big, they play a big role. The audience plays a big role in the performance, because they, I feel them, naturally. And I think that the there's some kind of moment of magical moment that I wait for during performance. You have to make it happen when you have an audience, because it's like a connection that this music is creating. Um, the sharing the energy of the space, of the time, as if the time was suspended. There's a moment of kind of suspension, or temporary, and it's this moment that is very strong in the performance, and so it's a physicality is I don't know how to formulate it, but physicality, but also something non visible, something invisible. Well, the water is formless. I use sound and electricity, which are invisible. At some point, there's something very, very mysterious happening, because you don't see it very well. Sometimes you have problem like in sound, and you don't know what's going on. Well, the history of electricity is not so long, and the installation of electricity in the building, in certain buildings, you don't know really where's the electricity, and it penetrates the body, and the sound penetrates the body. I think it vibrates the bones, and especially feedback is something that you hear with bones. That's what I think. So there's something you cannot really explain. I mean, this is all scientific, but there's many things that you cannot really explain. You cannot really see, visualize, and make into words, untranslatable to the words. So yeah, that's my answer. I don't know if it was a good answer, but
Thank you,
Yes,
Tomoko.
yes, thank you very much. Fascinating.
Thank you. So we'll move now on, and I know there are other questions in the chat, but we will come back to those later in the discussion. So, but thank you, Tomoko, again, and I will now hand over to Salome, who will give this yet another sort of shift in perspective, but kind of pick up, I think, on a lot of the things Tomoko was exploring in terms of really a sort of also shift of consciousness and shift of kind of sensibility about how we know and we interact when we're kind of working with sound. So thank you so much for being here, Salome, and we really look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Ramona, and the whole Performing Water team. I'm just quickly going to share my screen. I swim. I feel more adept in water than on land. I move, maybe even elegantly, but certainly powerfully, and fast, in long strokes and strong strokes. This is not moving through, but with water. We move each other, entangled, porous, reciprocal, not as form, but as formless movement, making waves. What to do if I want to keep this formless form that I experience in swimming? How to bring it on land with me? To make this watery sphere my life world, my experiential, phenomenological world in which I meet you? And how to bring this as a watery sensibility into my everyday, into the home, into the work, to the gallery, to the museum, to the concert hall, to everywhere I go. To experience this dense and indivisible connectedness as what carries us and what we carry with us from for a more watery world. I'm thinking of, for example, of a critical water gymnastics as a way to make us sense the strain of moving in dense materiality. This movement that you can see sometimes in a pool where people often to music move their legs and arms underwater and fight with the density of the materiality of the medium that they're in, so that they feel entangled and that they train to become a fish again. I find this possibility to enter a watery world also in sound. That is not the sound of, but is sound as itself, and as what defines us together, not in space, but as in an encounter, that just like water creates a voluminous dimensionality of everything it is with. Nothing is erased, nothing charted out on lines, cartographed, lexicalized, differentiated and taxonomized. Instead, we get a plural sense of the invisible indivisibility of existence as a voluminous dimensionality. So water and sound together present a cosmos of interbeing, where we are as fleshly and material bodies, as human and modern humans, and where we are revealed as living together. I experienced this most clearly in a swimming pool on a busy Wednesday afternoon, where there are children screaming, lifeguards using their whistles, water splashing against tiled walls, and everything together becomes an undistinguishable volume, a voluminous dimensionality in which I am, that we see, that we cannot see, that we can experience, and where vision loses its viability and center, and the seen, its singular reflection, to become an invisible density and expands, that we feel more in our skin than we actually see it or even hear it. It triggers a sort of expanded listening to ourselves with others. This volume is not created by the architectural infrastructure, by walls, windows, floors, ceilings, water, bodies, voices, but by their interaction, by how they reverberate together. Thus, it is not a measure of decibels, it's not a volume as decibels, but the expanse of sound as the embodiment of the formless, as an indivisible mass that reminds us of how we are together as interbeings, codependent, connected, and never alone. And so when I clap, you don't hear this hand or that hand, and you don't even just hear the sound they made together, but you hear everything that in this room reverberates and vibrates with that motion of clapping. And I believe it's probably too complicated to switch on all the mics right now, but I would very much like that you would do this yourself wherever you are. I mean, it would have been lovely, of course, if we were together in a room and we would all clap at the same time. And we could really hear this being together as if we were doing water gymnastics or as if we were being in this swimming pool on a Wednesday afternoon. But if you humor me and with me to the count of 3, we all clap. 1, 2, 3. For some of you, I heard, which is nice. Maybe we could have tried with a clap to kind of see what is the reverberation of the online space. What is the volume of the digital? But this is the kind of the sound, the clap as entanglement with myself and with everything around me, where I can hear myself with everything in my interactions, and it becomes a metaphor and it becomes an allegory of this a watery world, of a world where we are together, that is a sonic world. So water and sound are a means to get us to this imagination of the indivisible, of the codependent, of the interbeing, to get us to the sensibility and design of a world not as visible and mapped, and as one of bodies not as individuated and contained within our skins, but rather as a sensory indivisibility where things are in a moment of their being with, expansive, formless, and purposefully uncertain because they have lost their certain form but gained an expanse with others. In this sense, our clapping, as well as the water gymnastics, is political, since it performs an entrainment in the politics of indivisibility. It creates a governance of things together rather than apart, and ushers in the sensorial governance of a sonic cosmos that as a watery world is always close up and brings with it the criticality not of distance and objectivity, which is what we normally associate with criticality and with objective thinking and with scientific thinking, but instead what it proposes is the criticality of proximity, of being close up, where reason is sensorial, close up on my body, intimate, and I do not find comprehension, as in grasping the whole. I cannot grasp it, I cannot catch it, because I myself are part of it, in that water, doing my gymnastics. And where instead I come to a tacit sense, a felt sense, and I too am grasped in that tacitity from being with, where tacit knowledge is not a human knowledge only, but a knowledge of touch as a reciprocal act, where we can grasp a sonic cosmopolitanism, not only of a human politics, a human cosmopolitanism, but of human and more than human things. So thus it is a politics of waters, of ripples and waves taking shape, losing shape. Somebody's got a mic on. I'd be really glad if they wouldn't mind checking it out and closing it, because I have already my daughter in my ear on that side. And because we live in a sonic cosmos, I can hear her and she can hear me. And it becomes quite difficult, which is also obviously exactly the politics of differentiation that I'm experiencing at this very moment, which is also exciting, because I have to think of the connections, the connection between my voice and the voice we've just heard and the voice I hear in this room, as a politics of waters and ripples and waves taking shape, losing shape and transforming, being always in transformation all the time, and demanding that we sense things differently and that we sense ourselves differently, always in the encounter, always in connection from our response. And that also brings with it a responsibility, because we're not at a distance, and also that we make things responsible in the sense of granting it the ability to respond in its own voice. A work that I have found very inspiring to that effect, and how it takes on, I feel, through the water, also, of course, more than the water, but through the water we can think that work as a political work or in its politicness. This is a fountain by Cara Walker, Fonts Americanos, which was exhibited, as you can see here, in the Tate Modern Turbine Hall. The Tate Modern is this big museum in London, which has a turbine hall, and ever so often the Huandai commissions a big piece that goes in there into this whole hall. It is a fountain. It is a fountain that we very often see in France, in Germany, and in England. And it was inspired, this particular one, by the Queen Victoria Memorial Fountain that stands outside Buckingham Palace. As Cara Walker was on another visit driving to the airport, so she says, these fountains are normally empirical sculptures that celebrate colonial power, that have some sort of heroic men mostly on them, and then they have the ripple of water as the kind of metaphor of expanse and of the colonial of water that I think we also need to take care of, where the seas are not connecting and are not making a cosmos, a sonic cosmopolitanism of the world, but where the sea is something we have to go across in order to grab that country, in order to settle, in order to have that land. So the sea is seen as a separation that we have to overcome, rather than as a continuation or a being with. And this is what I feel, amongst other things, this fountain for me responds to, as it guides us mainly through that water, as to go round and round. I very much felt the urge to walk around these fountains, to enter into the rippling water, to enter into, again, this very reverberating hall that was almost like the swimming pool on the Wednesday afternoon, where I could appreciate the water as a sphere I was in, a sphere I was complicit in the colonial, as well as in the material density. And that I had to rethink through that. For Cara Walker, Fonts Americanos is an allegory of the Black Atlantic and really all global water, which disastrously connect Africa to America, Europe, and economic prosperity, and therefore to the exploitation, to slavery, to colonialism. That is a very different water, as I said, a water that talks of distance and objectivity and European hegemony and rationality, and the water that has to be crossed rather than has to be in, where we have to be in the water and do our political water gymnastics. And that's also where the water, where we can be very positive about what it enables, a water and of sound, of a sonic world and a watery world. But this watery world also brings us to a narrative of drowning, of despair, and of hopelessness. That I also want to bring in very briefly to the work of Anna Raimondo, Mediterraneo. These are the stills. Unfortunately, I can't play you the video, but I can tell you, you stand in this room on a big screen, and this glass gets dripped full, drip by drip by drip, of this very, very blue water, while Anna Raimondo says again and again, Mediterraneo, 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 until she can't speak anymore because her own voice is drowning. Her own voice is not able to speak the word Mediterraneo anymore, which brings us exactly, I feel, to that point where the water is still while the water is a consciousness that binds and that is open, that can help us imagine the inclusive and the formless, that is full of promise for a formless, connected body that is not anymore contained in its own individuality, that finds a different validity and a different viability. It also presents a grave, the Mediterranean particularly, but also obviously the Atlantic to slavery times presents a grave. It presents a grave of not being able to breathe, of not being able to be in that water. We are not equipped to live in water. Our lungs belie the desire for proximity and transgression, and we cannot really enter the utopia of a watery world. And that's where I stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonali. That was such a great way of sort of bringing a lot of the themes together that already resonated in the other talks, or that already came up in the other talks that now are resonating back. So thank you everyone for your presentations. We now have about, I would say, 20 minutes to discuss and then bring in everybody else as well. And I'm really interested actually in how you are responding in a way to each other and to each other's work, which comes from really different angles, but in a way also has a great kind of overlap and shared space. And I actually wanted to ask a question at the beginning, maybe to all three of you, or four of you, about the idea. So Salome really stressed this idea now of the connectedness, right? And of the, ability to really think differently, not through subject and object and individuation, but really in a sort of interconnectedness of all the sort of beings and objects in a particular environment. And I was wondering, how does this work when we are thinking about the sound pollution that we heard of with Sebastian and Robert at the beginning? So we have these examples of also how noise and sound pollution are sort of coming in. And I was wondering for Tomoko, how much do you play with that sort of element of sound pollution as well? And how does this sort of amazing cosmopolitan and sort of the opening and this kind of vision, utopian vision of sound that you've given us, Salome, sort of then kind of integrate the idea of noise and sound pollution? Anybody would like to start with that? Maybe Tomoko, do you use, is there something that can be a polluting sound in your performances, or does that not necessarily exist, that sort of hierarchy between a wanted and an unwanted sound?
It's an interesting question. I would say that I don't have a kind of hierarchy in sound. All the sound can be musical. Like there are kind of there's sound that is parasite sound coming from, for example, outside, like car noise from the street when I'm playing, of course, like or the noise that is made that is normally not non-desired. But when I started to play with feedback, the feedback itself is normally considered to be unwanted. You were supposed to it shouldn't happen. It's an undesired sound. It's noise. So like in the beginning, I was trying to avoid the feedback by, actually it's all about separation. You cut certain frequencies on the mixer, or you separate the room acoustic with like curtains or any material that can cut the sound between the stage and the audience room. But at some point, I thought it was super beautiful, and I started to play with it, and it was just super fascinating, and it was just opposite to the separation. It's all about connection, because the I needed. Then I started to need the room acoustic that is more shared and connected. I had to hear the same sound with the audience, and not like a stage which has its own sound system, and in the audience the speakers are targeting the audience. I needed the resonance of the space that connects all the sound. So so I don't know if I'm answering to your question, but and also, so the first of all, I don't know what is polluted, what is not, because we ourselves are our pollution, right? We ourselves are the original pollution. So all the sound, maybe all the music I produce is maybe a pollution. Maybe, I mean, what is pollution? And also, of course, I don't consider music as something to advocate something, right? Music is just music, and people can have whole freedom to receive it or not. You know, like yeah. So that's my answer.
Thank you. What about Robert and Sebastian and Salome? I mean, like Robert and Sebastian, you had this example really of you know, anthropogenic sounds that are sort of interfering with the sort of animal world underwater, and that are kind of another way of colonization that Salome was talking about as well. So how do you, either of you, kind of situate this idea of pollution?
Yeah, let me also, I find it, first of all, I would like just to quickly respond to the idea or notion of feedback, which I find quite interesting, also in the idea of pollution, I guess, because feedback is not only something which is not wanted, but in the history of science or scientific research, feedback is also something which, like a control mechanism, right? You send in some information, you ping a system, and then you get a response of the system which gives you information. It's like if you use, as an example, active sonar, for example. Like it's sending out pings of sound and looking what's reflected and coming back, which gives you an idea how the environment looks like. And feedback mechanism also, like, I don't know what the English word for Fliehkraftregler is also like a system, you know, in thermodynamics, which is used in order that systems can automatically regulate themselves in order not to excel or being too, you know, like machines not really going out of their regular circles, right? So this is a very interesting notion, to have feedback as something which in the, like in room acoustics, for example, is something that you don't want. But if it makes it just made me think about what is pollution is always depending on the idea, or in let's say in environmental terms, it's always depending on an idea of a system. Because what is pollution is there referred to what is a signal and what is noise, right? So if you have pollution, it always means that you're drowning a signal in noise, which means that the humpback whales cannot communicate anymore because there's too much sound or noise of vessels. And if you have like a sonar ping, which is for you something which gives you a signal, which gives you information about the environment, is for a humpback whale a noise which makes him disoriented and no longer being able. It's like if you also send down like sound bombs in order to find out, is below the ocean surface, is there oil or something else which we could make use of as humans, is also something which is heavily disturbing the acoustic sonar, or the sonosphere of the bioacoustic sonosphere of marine inhabitants. And so the idea of what is pollution brings us always back to the question, who is in charge of the perspective, right? If we judge, for example, the ocean as a communicative system in which also the animals must be able to communicate, we're still sticking to a very anthropocentric view of the ocean. And it seems like it's very, as Salomo has said, it's very hard for us humans, let me call it that way, it's very hard for us humans to just sit there and listen, and not being always interpreting things and networks as systems with meanings and stuff. It's very hard for us just to sit there and let things happen, and not being the person or filling the position where we insult meaning on the things that we are just perceiving. And I thought this is perhaps something where the three or four of us, the three perspectives are more, can be interlinked as well. But I'm not quite sure if this answers any of this.
If I
But
can,
Tomoko, you were heavily nodding.
may I can just quickly add, I completely am, Sebastian, I'm in agreement with you that, of course, from a biodiversity and from an ecological perspective in relation to sort of underwater pollution in terms of animals, of course, there is, we can maybe talk about the pollution and we can talk about what is disorientating for animals. And where we should maybe just sort of, because why we make that sound is again in a colonial settler sort of mentality of we want a knowledge that we can grasp and grab and have for us. It is about what we want, and it is a very it reflects on an American stroke European sense of science and scientism and universality and what we need to know. However, I think there is another part to it, and this is something that has recently been reconsidered. The acoustic ecology movement, for example, historically started. I think we always have to look at the plural positions of history, and there are other starting points, but one seminal position that gets taught is R. Murray Schafer and his notion of acoustic ecology. And he actually, I actually do not refer to him very much anymore because I really feel he's been shown to have extreme ideologies in his notion of good sound and bad sound, lo-fi and hi-fi, which also bordered on the racist and exactly the settler mentality in Canada of, oh, I can't hear this because this is famously, Dylan Robinson quotes him in his book, Hungry Listening. I can't hear Inuit throat singing. He doesn't even call it Inuit, he called it Eskimo throat singing because it's just so awful. Yeah, and it's really dangerous. I think we have to just always be on our toes when we talk about pollution in that sense, or maybe in a philosophical sense, in an artistic sense, because then the disorientation also becomes an ideological and a political orientation, and how we orientated in the world. And obviously everything that doesn't fit in with my normative orientation becomes noise, becomes unusable to my knowledge schemes, becomes unthinkable and unfeelable, and therefore it is noise. And I think that's where we, and I'm not saying I think you're doing that, Sebastian, so this is just something I wanted to add, that I think disorientation can be something extremely positive as well, when we purposefully disorientate ourselves in order to become aware of our normative listening and understand that noise and silence are lines we draw along chronological, historical preferences and biases.
Yeah,
I also
sorry.
would, just to jump in very quickly, I would stress this point, as you mentioned it, Salome, found very important, even though it did not came up in my presentation, that I mean, we would have to look very carefully at how this notion of pollution supports the argument of these papers, and how it makes use of this. I was also wondering about this of these notion that goes back to the acoustic ecology movement of the biophony and of the anthropophony. So these are very schematic categories that position natural against civilized soundscapes. And I would certainly subscribe to this, that we have to be careful with these notions that go back to the acoustic ecology movement. And I was struck only just to mention two moments of your presentations, Tomoko and Salome. So I like this idea of the reciprocal movement and this watery sensibility, and the also your allusion to this connected sonic space which we all live in. And there we would have to think, when we also take the feedback into account, of how animals or non-human animals react to noises made by ships and other non-human entities. So perhaps birds change their pitch, whale songs move to different frequencies or so. So that would also be interesting to see. While also it is important perhaps we could think about the so-called silence during the or reduction of noises underwater during the lockdown periods in the corona pandemic, for instance. So just to bring up a few thoughts in a very associative manner. Thank you. One thing I would really like to add is this. I'm not sure if you know Michel Redolfi, who's a performance artist, and I was remembered of him when you were speaking about the Salome, when you're mentioning the swimming pool, because he is an artist that made these underwater sounds and experimentation with music in the 1970s. And he has this wonderful quote. I have it here, just read it out for you. Water materializes sound, thickens it, makes it palpable and penetrable. Water and sound combined together at the molecular level create a sonic and fluid substance that can be appreciated not only by looking at its surface reflections, but by sinking oneself into its volume, density, warmth, and vibrations. I thought this related somehow to your idea and concept of reciprocal movement and being with water or becoming with water.
Maybe I can add, or Ramona, do you want to propose another question? I see Anna.
I have a question, but I think you should ask first. I think it's much better if this works organically.
Okay, that's cool. No, because I just wanted to support Salome, what you were saying. Exactly. What I wanted to make, point the finger to was that pollution and noise are power notions, right? They can offer us an insight into the power relations that lay behind them. And I find, just as a quick remark, I find one book very, very exciting, which just came out last year. It's called Pollution is Colonialism, which is really reflecting on how colonialism or such notions like pollution are set in a scientific framework which is deeply colonialistically rooted, right? So there is this kind of what we in our talk we're already criticizing or just putting it on the table is already starting in the sciences to become like a theme, a topic to reflect on while you are doing science in order to and the question if you can step out, but at least reflect on your positioning while you are doing natural sciences or applied sciences as not something like universally, as not something like there is one pollution and this means that. And I think that lots of this Anthropocene discussion has brought us, as you said, disorienting ourselves by stepping away from we as humans position of interpreting. But I guess it's still a long way to go there. It's just the first steps.
Thank you, Sebastian. I was actually wondering, connected with this. So one of the other things that really struck me about how these different talks connect is that in a way, in each of your talks, there's a sort of an unknown world that sort of opens up, right? For the scientists, they're suddenly baffled by hearing these sounds underwater where they thought there was stillness, In Salome's watery world, there is a sort of different kinds of consciousness that we can gain in the world, but also a different kind of politics that arises out of the connectedness. And for Tomoko, there is this sort of laboratory with water in a way that that's happening, and that as you were saying in the answer to one of the questions, sort of then connect to trying to create a moment where somehow all of this sort of comes together and one feels each other in a way. So and I think that's really beautiful, and I'm really interested to hear more about that. Or what do you think about that idea of a sort of unknown world that opens up through sound, and whether the passageway to that, these sort of new spheres or worlds that we are discovering there, or that we are experiencing there, maybe is a better word, isn't technology the tool that gets us there in a way? I mean, is sound studies something that really, in a way, rises through the sort of, you know, technology plays a really important role in your art, and also in your research, Robert and Sebastian. So I'm wondering, how do you see the connection between the two in a way? Or
you asking all of us, right?
I'm asking all of you, but you know, anybody can start. Feel free to start something.
It's just my experience of working with scientists, and I like to do that, but it takes an awful lot of work. It takes an awful lot of taking care of them to make them feel comfortable, because, and I think that is also why for me sound is one way of helping us to decoloniality, because sound is always disorganized and disorderly, and it doesn't allow us the same taxonomical thinking. It doesn't allow us the same lines that we've drawn in a visual sense since Enlightenment, where we've ever more looked for an objective, a mechanical objectivity that could lead us to this objective ideality of, we know the world is here and it's a transcendental knowledge and we come to know it, but more in it, no, it is actually all very contingent, and we come to know it because we generate it as much as we come to know it. And I feel there is always this discrepancy between people and ourselves. I mean, I think we get colonialized the moment we step into a primary school or into kindergarten, because we get pushed underneath this kind of one knowledge frame, this one hegemonic universalizing knowledge frame. And it's a real fight to get out under it and to realize that the only people we can decolonialize are ourselves, essentially. Otherwise, we have an extension of coloniality going on. But where I want to get at with that is that sound always troubles. Sound is that trouble that Donna Haraway talks about, and it is the problem that somebody like Bonaventura Ndikong talks about in relation to race. It is always the problem, and it has to stay the problem, because once it's not the problem anymore, then it is either contained in musical language or in the semantic. It is only then when sound is a problem, and sound is a problem for funders to sort of think, oh no, but that we don't get it. Or when it's a problem for disciplines, oh no, this is too interdisciplinary, we can't cope with that. That's when sound is at its is strong, because it is sound when it is troubling what we thought we knew, and when we thought we knew how to work in a particular discipline, be that science or the humanities or the arts. I think it's always, we have disciplinary lines, and sound troubles them, and sound makes them difficult and disorganizes them. And I think that's why what I find is the excitement or the real radical potential and capacity of sound to make us rethink. But it is also why it is still excluded, why it is still that thing that, you know, we can do a bit of sound art and sort of, you know, do a bit of sonification at the end of a scientific project and make it all sound pretty. We can use it to maybe, you know, appease the mayor of Geneva about CERN and the whole everything that's going on, have a few nice compositions, but it is not sonic thinking. The sonic thinking is the troubling that would, I think, get us to that other world.
Thank you. If the other two, if you want to jump in, feel free. Otherwise, I also am keen to open up to the rest of the room, because there's lots of questions in the chat. And I don't know, Camilla, do you have somebody who has an immediate question, or somebody a question that we can pick up on from the chat that has already been posed and that we should start?
We are very good at answering the questions in the chat as soon as they pop up. But Carolyn Wilkins, maybe you would like to ask, are you still here with us, Carolyn? Maybe you would like to ask a question to Tomoko about different musical traditions that she's referring to? No, apparently Caroline cannot hear me. So the question was about this instrument from 1930s, theremin, you know, theremin vox, where you play with your hands. Do you know about this instrument, and were you thinking about it?
Yes, sure. I know theremin, but many people refer to that instrument when talking about my hand manipulation with water. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about the theremin, but yeah, maybe Sebastian and Robert, maybe you know more about theremin. But also, I wanted to talk, I say a little bit about the technology when Ramona talked about it. Um, the relationship with technology, and it's for me, maybe, I mean, I've been thinking about it as I think that you know, the ceramics is also technology. I mean, you know, it was a so it's, and what I'm doing technologically, it's nothing advanced, right? It's very basic, but it's also how you use your hands with this technology, the craft, how you craft the sound using this technology, ceramics, microphones, amplifications. I also use some electronics like computer to modify a sound. Um, um, and I artistically, I think it's interesting when it's most interesting when you don't really recognize what's there, what's the technology used, and it's all about the balance between the balance of the dose, the quantity, how of the technology you're using. Um, it's like blurring. You can use a little bit, and then it can be effective. Um, I mean, I'm talking purely artistically, but I like the idea of trompe oreille, trompe l'oreille. It's like trompe l'œil, mais trompe l'oreille. So like you hear something, but you don't really know what it is. Like you thought you had something, but you don't know. So yeah, that's my.
Thank you, Tomoko. In fact, there was a number of admirative comments in the chat saying that, like, it's not evident to understand where does the sound come from, the source of the sound.
Yeah.
I think Anna had a question.
Anna, do you want to ask your question?
Did you say Anna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'll go. So thanks to all of you. Anyone is welcome to respond, but I think my question refers to more of Salome's sort of larger work on these questions. I mean, one thing that's been troubling me a lot recently as we're working on this project is, as I'm sure all of you know, a lot of work is being done either in reality or creatively imagining so that bodies of water obtain a voice, obtain a hearing before courts of law, and then thus can be recognized as entities with rights. And I'm wondering, which is the more urgent task? Is it to labor towards this recognition as entity, or rather to work towards a world that rejects entities in favor of relationality? So I have an ethical conflict in my own task. Which anyone have answers to that?
I think it is an interesting ethical conundrum, because obviously as soon as we talk about entities, it is an effort of putting something that is non-containable, something that is formless, into the schemata of the formed, and giving it therefore clarity and visibility and the name. And obviously that gives us a sort of short-term a short-term visibility and a short-term justification, I'd be very careful about that. It very much reminds me on the discussion of, for anybody interested in sound art, between Christoph Cox and Seth Cohen on the idea of sound art, and Seth Cohen arguing, oh, sound art just has to behave more like conceptual art, so we can fit it into theory and theorizing as it exists in the Western philosophy. And Christoph Cox saying, no, actually, that, you know, the problem is not with sound art, it is with theory, it is with how we theorize since the Platonic age, that we create entities, that we create things that we understand in relation to ideality, and that we understand, as he calls it, in a provincial chauvinistic frame. And I'm glad he says that. You know, I feel that is my problem, and obviously my inclination as an artist and as thinking philosophically would be to go, no, if we continue with the notion of we need to acknowledge entities, there is always something that cannot be an entity, that remains transforming, that remains ephemeral, that remains invisible, that we exclude. So we never actually work on the principle of exclusion. So I would actually go in favor of get rid of the entity notion.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe sort of jumping, you know, on top of that, or adding to that, you know, Salome, you said, like, you know, sound is troubling, and ultimately what we are really asking for is to really reconceptualize how we structure our thinking and how knowledge actually operates. And so my question would be, how would you then, for example, reorganize the sense of a university or of disciplines? How would you, and what role would sound play in that?
This is a super interesting question, particularly as at the moment I'm in Germany, and Germany is more interdisciplined than every country I've ever met, maybe with the exclusion of France, actually. It's very, very discipline driven, like you really become your discipline, and you have to stay within your discipline in order to be visible, in order to be because it is still based on a truth that is available, and on a disciplinary canon and foundation that's available. And obviously that is super difficult, because that means that everything you do now has to be referenced in the past, has to be referenced through history. And the problem is, of course, if as a woman, for example, or as a non-white person, you're not represented in history, how do you ever make your knowledge count? If that is the frame of evidence and reference goes into the past, which is problematic. Maybe in the sciences, the frame of reference is slightly different. I'm talking about the arts and humanities frame of reference, which always has to bring out certain names and certain texts in order to be believable, in order to have credibility and legitimacy. But I think the project really has to start in kindergarten. It is a pedagogical project. It is a project of generating a sensibility, and the kind of living with the disorganizedness as a positive, as something exciting, as something that is not frightening, but that opens up what we can feel and what we can think. And so I think, yes, it is about how we are taught, because I think before children are taught, they actually, that's why they have such a, you know, what we would call dreadful spatial awareness, because to them things hang together very differently. Time hangs together very differently. Space hangs together very differently. Briefly, I think teenagers get that again, where it all goes a bit difficult, but we consider that bad, and we educate them to work in lines. And I think we lose a huge potential, because they only listen to semantic sense, and they hardly ever get to make sounds in schools, at least the schools I have experienced and the education systems I know. When, if they could, you know, we could actually be more at ease with being in water, be more at ease in water as a metaphor, and being in water as a way of thinking the world as connected and as relational, and where maybe the knowledge we really need exactly right now, where we need to deal with really big global problems, is not in either this discipline or that discipline or this discipline, but it's in between. And yet the in between is such a difficult place for universities to grasp, for funders to grasp, for people to trust in. So I have no, I mean, apart from starting in kindergarten and hoping that a whole generation of new people will upset the university, I don't have an immediate solution.
Okay. I also have a question, Sebastian and Robert, and people please raise your hand if you have a question too. In terms of, I mean, the kind of story that you were telling us about the history of the hydrophone and what it sort of created as a kind of like as a byproduct in a way, right? Suddenly like discovering the sounds of whales and then kind of even scripting the whales or scoring the whales in a way and kind of transforming their sounds into something else. In a way is a wonderful example of, a conundrum that we have as well right now, right? Which is that one of the problems of like climate change and science is the communicability of the data, right? And it seems that, your suggestion here is that the combination of natural sciences with sound studies and sound art is a way of reaching that kind of level of communication and kind of creating maybe an empathic or affective connection that then sort of enables you to sort of look at things differently or acknowledge in a way the whale in a totally different way. Can you maybe expand on that or tell me that I'm wrong in how I've kind of summarized,
Well, I would not say that you're wrong, but I would just stress that it's not a suggestion, it's just an observation, rather, that throughout the history of oceanic sciences, there has been some kind of outreach or some kind of, it started with an idea of how could you apply this knowledge to different kind of realms, for example. And it seems like with more political relevance, like climate political relevance of these research, they start to multiply efforts, or other like stakeholders are coming in. It's not only like scientists looking for artists or public PR people in order to convey their messages. It's also rather that people jump on board literally and asking them to participate. It's like they're becoming an object of an object of ethnographic studies, for example. And it's more like blurring boundaries, or also, yeah, perhaps it's more like blurring boundaries and multiplying certain kind of approaches in order to spread the word to some degree. And I don't think this is like an intentional kind of effort or approach, but rather like a genealogy that cannot be stopped very easily, because now you see there is funding for science and arts relationships, or there are fellowships or kind of stuff like at the Max Planck Institutes, for example, in Germany and stuff. So it is institutionalized already as some kind of interdisciplinary kind of work. And it seems to me that art could have become some kind of an instrument in this kind of funding landscape, at least in German academia, in order to, because there are some hopes, but I'm not quite sure what these hopes are, what they can do with that kind of artistic results then. But
yeah, let me just jump in and add one example that I would like to mention here. I put this link for all of you in the chat. So if we are thinking about this, the works that were mentioned here, Hungry Listening and Pollution as Colonialism, it is obvious that we also would have to situate the oceanic sciences in a broader history of technoscientific of the technoscientific complex, and as a non-innocent technology, or the hydrophone as a non-innocent technology, as Donna Haraway perhaps would frame it. And there is an interesting film that I wanted to point you to, which is called The Whale and the Raven. And it is about two people who go I'm not sure on the west or east coast of Canada, and they are observing whales, but they do it from outside. So then they do not go into the water. They only have their microphones in there, observing orcas and other whale populations. And the film is an interesting example of how these people that are amateur scientists commence and begin to collaborate with indigenous populations, because there is a plan to build a gas or a plant for liquefied natural gas in the in a whale habitat near the coastal area. So I mean, that would be a kind of an interesting example to show how we can decolonize sound studies and have different perspective also in take them into account in this field of research, and have this the ocean as a sonic space that is entangled with different not to say entities, but people, whales, and geological materials.
But also perhaps just taking up Salome's point on how on the, let's say, critical potential of sound and studying sound. It seems like constructing the ocean as a sonic environment seems also very inviting for different participants, for different disciplines to jump in. As you could see at the paper that Robert, you were presenting, the Duarte paper, which like a bunch of disciplines, and even though including humanities and arts, have been understood this kind of research as an invitation in order to collaborate with them. So I would be also, there are some hints at least how academia is changing just slightly over the years. If there are clusters of interdisciplinarity in Germany, there and if it becomes more common that also interdisciplinary teams not only spreading like physics and biology, but also spreading the whole of academia spectrum, could have been, I don't say that it's normal already or it's like common, but it's possible at least. And so perhaps like the more turns we have, the more interdisciplines, like Holger Schulze says, we have to establish, and sound is just one of them, and perhaps water can become the next one. Like,
that sounds good. I like the idea. I think there's one final question from Steen, and then I think we're also almost out of time after that. Steen, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it's a bit of a question and a comment. I have this book here, it's a great book, Here Where We Are by Michael Stoker, and there's one chapter where he explains like the hearing of especially cetaceans, but also many other marine life is not like our hearing. It's basically a different way of being in their world, which is strange to us. And I was just asking if perhaps listening without instrumentalizing it too much into science or for a specific art, but just being open and listening is a way of connecting to a world which we don't know. Yes, we know water and we know which species live in there and we know what the quality of the water is, but we can't experience what it means to live in that world. There's also slightly related to the question of pollution, what is pollution, and to the talk of Salome of what is sound and how could it bring us into a thing that we don't know.
Does somebody want to pick that up? We don't know what it actually feels like to listen like a whale.
Yeah, I think the idea that we have to have not an instrumentalized listening, like that is exactly what I mean. In school, we learn to listen for the right answer, the right sentence construction, the right mathematical equation. And even if we learn an instrument, traditionally speaking, we learn to listen for the right harmonies, the right intervals, and the right sound. And this listening as a being with, open to whatever we might hear, whatever world we might hear, I think is in a way, as you say, supposed to be, maybe just listening. But I think that just listening is what we are actually so bad at, that we can't, because we're so trained to make everything has to have a purpose and make sense. And I think that's where I have this hope for sonic fictions, for sonic possible worlds, for a phonocene, for these other worlds that we could imagine, because it is so very difficult to imagine beside ourselves.
Thank you.
Let me just quickly add that of course, it's perhaps it goes back to a very, very old phantasma of humankind, that we could be able to transform into something else, right? So if you look at the cultural imaginarium, like this has a long history, like metamorphosis, for example, right? So, but I like the idea of the wish that lies behind it, right? This is the meaning, I guess, what Salome means, that with this kind of opening up and like, or exploring, like, even though it is not possible to 100%, it's like getting closer, not close, but it's trying to do it, right? It's trying to irritate yourself by listening to the world or to your habitat as a penguin, for example. And I'm not a friend of saying, well, this is only limited to sound. You can also like use visual filters in order to look like a tiger, for example, right? So there is a chance of this will to become post-anthropocentric, which is multiplying the possibilities of our perception. And it's on the same page, like the inverse part of the coin is that by that we recognize our own biomedia limitedness of our perception. And this is criticizing the whole epistemological basis, which is like in this kind of reciprocal relationship to that. And I guess this is the only chance, by like this disorienting, disturbing our perception by such means, for example. And they can be technical, or they can be just like imaginative traveling, for example. But by that we can work back to the more what could be called more abstract notions of how we make sense of the world. Yes. So it's not an answer, but it's like more or less like a hope that it's not meaningless to try to think differently and by trying to listen differently.
I guess there was one kind of comment in the chat to your sense of metamorphosis, Sebastian, saying like, in how far technology is that not really the core tool that would make that happen?
By technology, I mean, well, it's even though Robert and I were working at the Humboldt University, like in the old Kittlerian kind of rooms, perhaps, I would not buy into like a media a priori of this is the game changer for all that could happen. That's why I would like to stress that it's also possible by imagining different stuff. It's not only that we depend on technology to do all this. And I'm not quite sure if this is it's like transferring our responsibility onto like technology or others in order to instrumentalize what we should be responsible ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Arsu has he was one that was asking the question, and has another question back. You want to?
Hi, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Hi, Arsu.
Hi. I thought that was like just kind of a following association of like what you were saying, and that if technology can help us with this metamorphosis, because indeed, like when listening and thinking about microphones as, of course, the technology that they are, bringing us much closer to any kind of other worldly listening, and then whatever speakers we use, whatever headphones we use, bringing us closer to that. in that term, but then also in another term of, for example, yeah, just helping us sort of expand our sensibilities or our yeah, Wahrnehmung, kind of the perceptions in a multisensorial way. Also sort of this, yeah, I don't know, classic thing are glasses or hearing aids, or if you want to go one more step, there's this one visual artist who has this like sensor, I'm sure everybody knows about him, but I forgot his name, who has this sensor attached that brings sounds to his that brings sounds of colors to his brain, so he has a completely different perception when he goes through, you know, an environment, because the sounds are triggered, or like, yeah, sounds are triggered in his brain according to the colors that he sees, because he doesn't see it really, it's really just like sensor camera. And that kind of makes a different being already in that sense. So I mean, it's not particularly a question, but more of like a associative curiosity. Sorry to extend, but couldn't help myself then jumping in. But thanks. Yeah.
That was great.
Thank you, Arzu. I didn't mean that technology cannot help by doing this, but it's not. But we just need to be careful, not stressing the point too much or overload technology with these wishes that in the end just, you know, pushing the responsibility for things away, like waiting for new technology to save the world, kind of. This is what I wanted to say. And I guess if by defining what technology means, or media means, for example, rather, then and using all, that's what we call biomedia, our like biomedia, our constitution, like what eyes, ears, what else, and skin is already kind of a mediator between something like the self and our our environments. So these other things are just like working with that in common, right? And then we don't make up hierarchies between us as human entities and the media as something different.
Magomed, you also have a question? Do you want to?
Yes, I would like to comment when you said that we cannot really experience life underwater, but what do you think about the people who dive underwater with oxygen, and they actually make documentary movies about trying to live with fish, etc. You can see them diving very deep underwater and basically touching, living among fish, etc. What do you think about that?
Does that go for me, Magomed? Or was it for all of us?
For all of you, like when you said you couldn't really experience life underwater, but I believe with modern technology like submarines, etc., and diving deep underwater with oxygen tanks, you can actually experience this kind of underwater life. You can observe and touch the underwater fish, for example.
Yeah, of course you can experience an underwater life, but it is always your personal life. I just wanted to stress the point that the idea of becoming a fish is something like is a phantasma, which is nice and important, but there is always a gap that we cannot really become a fish, but we can get closer. We can get into that. We can try to attune us to these kind of environmental relations that other species have by, for example, technological means of living or staying underwater very long. But it's not like a metamorphosis, a complete metamorphosis.
If I may quickly jump in, I actually think the issue for me certainly is not about becoming fish or becoming anything else, because I feel there's a huge danger of a hyper anthropocentrism where we just sort of, you know, like in children's book where we over identify and we think, oh, now the rock can speak because I can hear it, or the tree can speak, and I don't think that is at all. I mean, I find that potentially a little bit dangerous, and I also don't think. I don't think when you go diving in a suit with an oxygen tank, you live like a fish. I mean, I just don't think so. And that's why I also, for me, actually the imagination and the thinking of it while you're doing your water gymnastics or swimming is almost more valuable, because it's not about becoming, for me, I'm not at all a Deleuzian, and it's not at all about becoming the other, which I see as a colonial taking over of a body, of an animal or of an object or of whatever it is, but more about the disorientation that we spoke about earlier, and the pluralizing of how we are together. So I know that obviously I can only be I. You know, that's that funny thing when you look into the mirror and you think, why am I? And you do this 100 times and you go really, really dizzy, because that is truly the only position I can have. But what I can decide is where I end in terms of empathy and understanding and working with and being with. But I think in all of this reaching out to, we also have to understand the responsibility of our limitation. As a real ethical responsibility. I cannot pretend I understand fish or start to speak for them. I think that would become very, very dangerous.
Just the last sentence, sorry, but I need to say that, because that's the difference. If you mention Deleuze, then the difference to that is a Derridarian idea of how incorporating the others by not incorporating it, right? This is the ethical dimension that perhaps you have also tried to bring on the table, Ramona, and that you, Salome, are working on, right? As far as I understood you, this is what I had in mind by not becoming a fish, but how can we just make sense and get to the other? How is this dialectical kind of not appropriation, but dialectical constellation working of the othering, always taking part in the constitution of I as myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I will actually borrow the words of somebody else to end this, and it's one of the people in the chat, because she posed a wonderful question that is maybe not to be answered, but is more a way of practicing something differently and opening up to new perspectives. And this is Felicia, and she asks, I love switching. So her question is, what does water know about you that you don't know about yourself? So that is all for you to answer as you leave this session and find answers too. But I think it's a nice way of kind of thinking about the approaching of the other rather than becoming the other. All right, thank you everyone for hanging in there. We really ran over time. Thank you everybody for wonderful performances and presentations and discussions, and for the sort of openness of exchange. We are working on further iterations of this seminar, or kind of other forms of reading groups, etc., etc. So if you're interested, please reach out to us, and we will reach out to you with further updates if you are on our mailing list. Okie dokie. Thank you so much, Salome. Thank you so much, Tomoko. Thank you so much, Sebastian and Robert. This was truly fascinating and a wonderful end to our first kind of triplet of sessions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Yay.
Exchange ideas with you.
Also from my side, all to all the participants and questions. Lovely.